And some of them, they acknowledge, this movement doesn't have defined goals. But some of them are basically saying, the system seems broken. It seems that it's not working. And just by me being there, just by me occupying, is sending a message. And I have to admit that resonates with me. Just the fact that somebody would feel compelled to be physically present to say, hey, I want to be counted because what I'm doing isn't working. Now I want to ask another question of you. And this is not a yes/no question. Please do not raise your hand. And just think about the question. I'm setting you up there, actually, because you won't think about the question. But I'd like you to think about the question, and then just quietly answer in your head. Don't disturb anyone around you. But there's probably not a single person in this room that will answer the question at the beginning of the lecture. Some of you at the end of the lecture will be willing to answer the question. But when I ask the question at the beginning of the lecture, you will automatically say, that question does not apply to me. It doesn't apply. I can't answer it. And the question, it's very simple. The question simply is, why do you? Why do you, personally, it's a personal question, why do you personally love slavery? Now you see how you can't answer that question, right? Because you're saying to yourself, I don't love slavery, that's preposterous. That's ridiculous. None of us love slavery. I don't think it's so cut and dry. I mean, I've often, lectured, and I kind of use this as a tool of wisdom for getting through life, that if you want to know somebody, you look at what they do. Because what's really in our heart will come out in our actions. And simply, let's say you really love music. You're going to be a musician, and you're going to encourage your kids to be in music. You're going to surround yourself with music. You could just fill in the blanks for anything else. What you love comes out through your actions. It just simply does. Now, I will explain to you, but it's not going to be news, that we are, and not just in the area of health, but we're losing freedoms. We all know that. We're losing freedoms. And most of us, which is why I asked those questions, most of us are doing really nothing about it. And it just seems to me, and you can disagree, that actually if you love freedom, you don't stand by and do nothing while our freedoms are taken away. But, let's say you love slavery. You truly love slavery. And freedoms are being taken away. What are you going to do? What are your actions going to show? You're going to do nothing, right? And so just appreciate, because sometimes, we're not really aware of our psyche. Appreciate that your actions are saying that you do love slavery. And by the end of the lecture, you might be willing to answer that question. And when I get into kind of our rights issues, one of the things that's interesting is the government's becoming more adversarial and more aggressive at actually taking control over your body, what you can eat, what you can drink, what health risks you can avoid. One issue that's come up in the city where I live is the smart meter issue. Kind of an interesting one. Now, I just use the term smart meter because that's what they're called, and then you know what I'm talking about. But I recognize that's an Orwellian term. There's nothing smart about putting a microwave transmitter on a home or in a home. And I'm not here to preach about smart meters. I believe, though, that there is ample evidence that would cause reasonable people to want to be proactive and avoid the risk. I mean, even the World Health Organization has listed them now as a possible cancer-causing agent. Carrie Crofton was at this show last year, and she's written a book that shows about 80% of the independent research shows they're dangerous. But the industry-funded research is inconclusive. And almost everywhere where they're installed, groups form to oppose these meters, which isn't that telling in itself. Why would that happen in pretty well every city and town? In the city I'm in, they've just installed wireless water meters, and people have started calling me saying they've gotten sick. And one of them said I could share her story. Her name's Louise. She's about 75, mid-70s. She was even though she's an older lady, was very active. I mean, we're talking she would play tennis a couple times a week, big into gardening, yard work, very healthy, very active. The very day they installed the meter, she became sick and disabled. And a couple of days later, she couldn't take it anymore. She called the city took the meter out, but she was still sick. And that's a pattern with everyone in Kamloops who's gotten sick. They've had the meters taken out. I've looked at the technical specs for our meters. The city has to be able to read them 2 kilometers away. So it means do a 2 kilometer radius around your house. Every meter in 2 kilometers is getting to you. So she's remained sick. And the interesting thing is what this actually tells us about how the government feels about us. Now, I'll explain that in a second. But what's really bothering Louise is she feels that her own home is no longer a safe place. She's lived there for 35 years. Our homes are the one place you can kind of go, no matter what's happening out in the world, whatever crises and bad things are happening, you can always go home and be safe. And she's told, even though she's spoken to me about it, she says, I'm actually so upset I can hardly talk about it. And what's really bugging her is it's being imposed on her. It's involuntary. If you want to avoid the risk, there's nothing you can do. It's being imposed. If you as a parent want to keep your kids from smart meters, there's nothing you can do. It's being imposed. And what does that say about what the government thinks about us when they will impose a health risk? They know we don't want it. There's opposition in every city. What does it say about who has control over your body when you can no longer be proactive? See, because the government used to be very concerned about allowing us to avoid potential risks. So let's just say with these meters, it's a potential risk, the science is undivided. I don't believe that, but just for argument's sake, shouldn't we have the right to avoid it? I mean, every other time there's been potential risks, the most obvious example is smoking. You know, I gave a lecture in Kamloops probably about 5 weeks ago, and for whatever reason, the crowd was older, just white hair everywhere. And I took the opportunity, I asked, I said, hey, how many in this room remember when your medical doctor used to recommend that you smoke for some things? And like half of the room, their hands went up, because they were old enough to remember when medical doctors would recommend to patients that they smoke cigarettes. Because the science was inconclusive, and a lot of doctors were being fed, yeah, for this condition and that, it's a helpful, healthy thing. There are lots of times when we're faced with inconclusive evidence. Breast implants, asbestos, smoking, I mean, the list could just go on. But every time in the past, whenever the evidence was inconclusive, the government would take a precautionary approach and actually do whatever they could at every level to enable us to avoid the risk. Do you understand the smart meters are a change? Yes. And so philosophically, you have to ask yourself, well, what does this say about who has ownership over our bodies? Because if you can't avoid the risk, and it's the government imposing the risk, then that tells us that the government no longer believes that we have the right to be proactive about our health. Doesn't it say that?
Yes. Yeah.
It has to. There's no other logical conclusion.
Right.
And we have to get in the habit when governments are doing things, even if we approve of them, take a step back and ask, okay, but what does this say about, what the government believes about me and my right to choose over my body? I mean, another favorite example about how we're losing our freedoms is the raw milk thing. And I mean, I'll talk about Michael Smith in a minute. I went and watched his sentencing on Friday in Newmarket. But, I mean, what could be more benign than raw milk, really? And for those of you who don't know, so in every province in Canada, it is illegal to sell raw milk, which is why you can't go to the store and buy raw milk. It's illegal to do that. And so for the few families, and I mean, it really is a small number across the country that, have educated themselves about raw milk and are passionate, or like me, I can't drink store-bought milk, I'll get sick, and my youngest child will get sick, but we can both drink raw milk. Well, we can't because the state won't let us. But there are families across the country that want to do that. And the way they try to get around the law is they actually get together and they buy a cow or two and form what's called a co-op. And their thinking is, well, there's no selling going on because we're just getting a portion of our own milk, right? And understand that is onerous to do. It's expensive. Often it requires you to do work and everything. And so the people doing it are doing it because they're very passionate about it, and they're small in number. But every province is attacking that And it kind of raises the question, why? And when I say attacking, I mean sometimes really aggressively. I want to share about Eric and Judith in Alberta. I think I shared this story last year, but it's just so compelling. They ran, it's a farm couple, they ran a 2-cow co-op, and the officials became aware of it and started dropping by the farm and telling them to stop and wanting to seize milk, and they wouldn't stop. So then Judith, one day, she's dropping milk off at one of the owners. She's in a private driveway, so she's not on the street, and she's getting out of her van, and 2 inspectors show up and they demand the milk. She's not going to give them the milk. She sits back in the driver's seat. She goes to close the door. They prevent her from closing the door, and they physically drag this farm wife out of the vehicle, physically subdue her, and then go and get the milk. No warrant, nothing like that. Over raw milk. Now, can you imagine, like just imagine, for any reason, being physically dragged out of your vehicle and subdued? I mean, this is a very serious state interaction. About a month later, this had happened on October 25th of 2010. It actually got worse. It's what I call the Great Raw Milk Takedown, because I think it was a sting operation. Because what happened is somebody phoned him and said, I want to join the co-op, and he was all hot to trot and eager to join. And so she had arranged to meet him in town, and she had a contract. You had to actually sign a contract because you're buying ownership of part of the herd. You had to pay money. And then she also brought in a cooler some milk, because if he became an owner, then he could start sharing with the milk. And so she shows up. This is 7:30 at night, end of October. It's dark. And he won't sign the contract. And she's thinking, well, this is odd, because he was so anxious to join. And then 2 inspectors show up and want to seize the milk, which is why I think it was a sting. First of all, how would they know she's there? And what are they doing working at 7:30 at night? So we probably have 3 inspectors being paid overtime. Well, she doesn't want to give them the milk. So it was kind of the same drill as last time. She gets in the driver's seat. They won't let her close the door. They start physically trying to drag her out of the driver's seat. But this time she sees somebody she knows walking down the street. She starts yelling for help. Help me, help me, help me. Well, don't you know, I guess state thugs, they're happy to drag farm wives out of vehicles when nobody's looking. But I guess they don't like doing it when it's so public. So they stop. They're not going to let her close the door. They're not going to let her drive away. But they've stopped trying to physically drag her out of the vehicle. So now her concern is her 4-year-old daughter sitting in the back seat, who's freaking out. And you have to know, at the end of all of this, when all is said and done and the police are gone, she had to take her daughter to the hospital because she couldn't settle her daughter down. And so she just had to make sure there wasn't anything medically wrong. But can you imagine being a 4-year-old? It's dark. And you see strange men trying to physically remove your mother from the vehicle? Like, no wonder she couldn't calm down. So Judith gets her daughter out of the car, goes to a nearby house where just somebody she knows and says, can you watch my daughter so the daughter doesn't have to be involved in this? And then she tells me that she comes out and she's just so emotionally wrecked that she doesn't feel she can deal with these people. Like, you know where you get where you're basically shaking, you're vibrating, you're so upset. So she goes into a church that's just right there, and she's trying to calm down, and she tells me, well, I'm not allowed to calm down, because then people in the church are saying, you have to go outside, the police are there, and they want to talk to you. So she goes outside, and she says the police had boxed her van in, like a police car front and back, the wigwag's going, you know, the blue and red lights, it's dark. She said it looked like there was a heroin bust. And with the police there, the inspectors were able to get the raw milk and go on their way. Now, I have trouble believing that happened. But it's funny, I was giving this lecture, well, I was telling this story, not this lecture, but I was telling that story in Edmonton. Eric and Judith were there. And they actually interrupted me when I was telling their story, and Judith added details and basically communicated, you know, you're kind of under-dramatizing it. It was way worse. But you can imagine if you lived it, it would be worse. Yes?
Is Canada the only G8 country that does this? I read that in the paper.
Oh, that drags people out of...
Well, no, I mean that does not allow to sale of raw milk.
No, most of the states in the U.S., some there you can buy raw milk, but most of the states in the U.S. you can't. And the FDA is doing very similar things.
And the other G8 countries?
I can't tell you about the other G8 countries, although I was told the other day that the Queen drinks raw milk. So I do want to carry on. We'll try and answer some questions at the end, so please let me carry on. Let's switch to Michael Schmidt. So, because most of you, because you'd be from Ontario, are very familiar that he is an avid campaigner for raw milk. He ran a co-op, he was charged, convicted, he continued, he was charged, and then he was acquitted. And in fact, has anyone read the trial decision? It was a beautiful decision, where basically, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but the court said, you know, people have the right, it's a fundamental right to decide how they're going to nourish themselves. It was just a beautiful decision. And the court looked at this co-op scheme and said, well, I think actually you fit within the legislation, it's not selling, and I find you not guilty. Now, the Ontario government had the choice. At that point, they could have said, you know what, courts found that what this co-op is doing is legal, and those few families that are going through the trouble and clearly passionate about wanting raw milk, you know, that's just a handful of people. Like, the government could have chose to leave them alone and to leave the decision alone. But no, we can't have that, can we? So the government appealed, and a funny thing happened at the appeal. At the appeal, Michael also argued that people have a constitutional right under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to access raw milk, and he had led evidence, you know, where some people needed it for health reasons and some also for their religious beliefs. They were vegan and the whole thing. And the court said, you know what? You don't have the right to bring that evidence in front of me. I don't care that you're charged with an offense. You don't have a right. The legal term is standing. The court will say you don't have standing. So in effect what the court does is say, well, yeah, you've got all this evidence here. But the court turns its back to the evidence. It says, I don't see that. You don't have the right to bring that in front of me. And it looks blue sky over here. I don't see any charter right violation. And said in paragraph 96 of that decision that there's not a charter right to drink raw milk. So we've gone from a decision that wasn't a charter decision, but a trial decision saying, you know, it is a fundamental freedom to decide how you're going to nourish yourself, to a higher level court saying you don't have a charter right to drink raw milk after not looking at the evidence. And this standing thing is becoming kind of the new weapon the governments are using in court to basically ask courts not to find in our favor. But before I go into the standing thing, I just want you to appreciate what does it say about how the Ontario government views your right to decide how you're going to nourish yourself when they feel the need to appeal the decision, when they, you know, argue in court that you don't have that right. And they literally, you would be surprised at what your government will argue in court, and it tells you very clearly who has control over your body. At least what their belief is. They believe they have control of your body. But back to this, you know, standing issue. Both in the United States and Canada, courts are using it as an excuse to basically fine for the government. I mean, was it last week or the week before Jesse Ventura's case got dismissed? Do you guys know who Jesse Ventura is?
Yes.
Okay, so former governor of Minnesota, avid rights person. And he, like me, doesn't like going through airports and getting sexually assaulted because he won't go through a full body scanner. I mean, I know I've been sexually assaulted. Like, you know, what's happened to me in airports, outside of an airport, I would be free to beat the person up and nobody would charge me. So he brings a case in federal court saying, this violates my Bill of Rights, all this sexual groping I'm being subjected to. And the court said, you don't have the right to be here. Federal court, federal agency that he was, and just basically threw him out. Said, you don't have the right to be here. I'm not hearing any of this evidence. Go away. I mean, in the United States, and please, because we're Canadians, and automatically we're like, oh, we're different though. That's them. But you know, these kind of secret committees that meet, and I'll tell you about it for those of you who aren't familiar with it. But I have to say, if it wasn't in the mainstream media, I wouldn't believe it. Like, even though I trust the kind of second-tier media more than the mainstream media, I do. I trust them more. But this is so fantastic that if it wasn't in both the mainstream and the secondary media, I wouldn't have believed. No, this is a lie. So the Obama administration has decided that it's legal, and it's happening. They have these secret committees meet, And they basically decide whether their own citizens are enemies of the state or not. That's not the term, but that's basically the effect. And if they determine that you're an enemy of the state, and remember, you're not even told they're meeting. You can't come and present evidence or say what they have is wrong or anything. You don't even know what's happening. You're a citizen. And if they determine you're an enemy of the state, they can also then turn around and issue a death warrant to basically charge the CIA or the armed forces to assassinate their own citizens. You have to be thinking about this. How can, in a liberal Western democracy, we go back to a star chamber, but worse, where government committees can be meeting without us knowing and basically declaring citizens, agents, enemies of the state, and then issuing their assassination? And, it was big news because they got their first citizen, and correct me with the pronunciation, it was Anwar al-Awlaki. I may not have pronounced that right, but you may have heard it in the news. They got him with a smart bomb in Saudi Arabia, and a whole bunch of people were cheering, he was an awful terrorist, and blah, blah, blah. Well, that may or may not be true. I don't know. Let's assume he was an awful terrorist. But do you want to live in a world where your governments will be in secret ordering that certain citizens be assassinated? What was wrong with bringing people to court and having a case presented and having them being able to present their case and then a judge or jury deciding? I mean, that's rule of law, isn't it? And I couldn't believe it. And another thing, which is kind of tied into this standing thing, their law now is if you're declared one of these enemies and the death warrant's out for you, it's illegal for a lawyer to represent you. The lawyer can be put in jail, can have criminal sanctions, and be sued for representing you. And this came into the news because this gentleman who was assassinated, before it happened, his father had tried to get the American Civil Liberties Union to represent him. And the only loophole in the law is, well, if the government gives the lawyer permission, then it's not a crime. And they were asking for permission, and it was never given. So they actually started court proceedings to have the legality of that tested. I mean, are we so unsafe we can't have lawyers represent people that have death warrants out for them that were issued in secret? I mean, it's a brave new world, isn't it? It's really fascinating. And I know, as Canadians, we want to say we're different, right? We want to say we're different. Please, never allow yourself to say in your mind about any group that we're different. And the reason why you can't say that is we're not different. We're all the same. And if you think we're different, then you're not going to be paying attention to make sure it doesn't happen here. And, we have done some awful things during this war of terror. I mean, Mehar Arar, what happened with that? Our government sharing, really, what we will now agree is false information with the U.S., and the guy gets tortured in a Syrian prison for a year, almost a year. And my daughter and his daughter are friends, and, I believe his suffering is still very real. It's not different. Now, I want to tell you about the True Hope case simply because there have been some recent developments in the federal court that I think you need to know about because it affects your health and your right to have access to treatments. And so I'll very briefly just share the True Hope story for those of you who haven't heard it before, and then I'll go into the new developments. But True Hope basically just developed a natural health product, it's vitamin and minerals, to treat bipolar disorder and major depressive disorder, very serious conditions. And the government decided to attack them. This is some years back. The government decided to attack them. The first thing the government did is it shut down, there was a double-blind clinical trial being run at the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Calgary, but it was actually funded by the Alberta government. So it wasn't a private clinical trial. The Alberta government had looked into this natural remedy, decided to pay for a double-blind clinical trial. So this was pure public research. I had all of my patients on the psychiatric drugs. I had to meet with every patient, every one, weekly, because they're so bad, I'm having to spend time counseling them not to be suicidal. But he says, the 50% of the patients I've transitioned on the EMPAR Plus, I don't meet with them weekly. I meet with them every 3 to 6 months. We're not counseling about suicide because they're back at work or they're back at school. They're not suicidal, they're healthy. Like he explained, it's literally night and day. So once he started using the EMPAR Plus, he said, I had nothing to do. So he said, I had to take on way more patients than I'd ever been able to handle before, because half of them are Empower Plus. Like, he gives his patients a choice, and about half choose the Empower Plus. So I asked him on the stand, I said, well, Dr. Popper, what would happen if the Empower Plus was taken away? No hesitation, there'd be deaths. Some people would commit suicides. They just couldn't do the transition. There'd be many hospitalizations. People would become disabled again. And he said him personally, it would affect him because he would have to give away half of his patients to other psychiatrists, because his patients would become disabled and he'd have to go back to meeting with every patient weekly. Like, this is powerful stuff. This is like a high caliber psychiatrist under oath in court. Health Canada started to take this product away. There were hundreds of letters written to Health Canada. Doctors wrote, psychiatrists wrote, people wrote, they wrote their stories. Hey, I've tried every drug, nothing worked, I'm well, why are you taking this away? There were so many calls to Health Canada, they set up a special line, so if you phone the minister's office, or their inspectorate branch, they would hit a button, they wouldn't even ask you if you wanted to be transferred, and you'd go to these so-called counselors who were, they'd just tell you, well, it's unavailable, go back to your doctor, but they kept notes. There are almost 800 pages of notes, anyone can read them, they're a court exhibit in Calgary. But they're so difficult to read because they're people begging for their lives. 800 pages of people begging for their lives, giving their stories. In some cases, they actually ask Health Canada, and it's written down, what are you going to do when I commit suicide? And then we had the Canadian Mental Health Association, the Alberta branch, their executive director started holding press conferences warning there would be suicides. And then he started holding press conferences telling about the suicides. And he told the court under oath even about a funeral he attended of one of the Canadian Mental Health Association members. So I'm just telling you, when True Hope told Health Canada we can't stop selling because there'd be deaths, I mean, they weren't blowing smoke. So they're charged. And at the trial, the court said, you were selling without a license, but I'm not going to convict you. I'm going to acquit you because it was legally necessary. It was legally necessary for you to ignore Health Canada and continue selling. Now the interesting thing is Health Canada had all the information that True Hope had. In fact, they had more information. They had all the calls and the notes and letters that True Hope wouldn't even have known about. They knew what was happening. Was it legally necessary for them to back off? It's a good question, isn't it? Because if you or I took away something that was essential for somebody's health, knowing that, and they died or were disabled, we'd be charged with criminal negligence, either causing death or causing bodily harm. Shouldn't the people in Health Canada making the decisions and doing this be held criminally, liable?
Yes.
I mean, it's a good question, isn't it? Because there seems to be a double standard. But where I'm going with this is the standing issue. So True Hope won at that level, but Health Canada had seized shipments using this. There's a seizure power in the Food and Drug Act, which basically says if an inspector believes there's an offense, it can be major, it can be minor, they can seize. And a couple of big shipments were seized with this power. And True Hope thought, you can't endanger people with this power. So they started a federal court action, and they basically just said to the federal court, listen, under our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, people have the right to make fundamental health decisions. And you cannot interfere with that in a way that endangers them. So all they were asking the court to do is find two things. Find that when Health Canada seizes a vital health product, something that people actually rely on, you have to first tell them, give them notice. Because these shipments were seized, Health Canada knew where they were going to. They were all individually packaged, name, address, phone number. They seized them, they didn't tell the people. And if you're expecting something that's vital to come to you and you're not told it's not coming, you can't make other arrangements. We're saying that's dangerous. If you seize a vital health product, you've got to tell the people you've seized the property, and you have to give them some opportunity to get the product back if their health need is greater than your need for enforcement, right? There's got to be some balancing between the state interest and your interest. And we're not talking going to court. Like if your health depends on something, you don't have years to slug it out through court. That's all we were asking. We let all of the evidence of people pleading for their lives and all the notes Health Canada took, Dr. Popper, the Canadian Mental Health Association, the suicides, everything. And I stood up in the federal court and I invited the federal court judge to find, as a matter of fact, that Health Canada caused deaths. that the use of this seizure power caused deaths. And I actually thought, when we were approaching this trial, the judge is going to go ballistic on Health Canada. I mean, think about it. I'm going to basically invite the court to find that Health Canada caused death, and that surely to goodness we need notice and the right to be heard. And the court pulled the standing trick. Said, oh yes, I know you've got this whole room full of evidence right there, but you True Hope and you David Hardy, you don't have the right to bring that evidence in front of me. You don't have standing. So the court basically turned its back, all the evidence is there, and looked forward, and the sky was blue, and I don't see any charter violation. There's no need for notice. There's no need for a right to be heard. And so we appealed. We appealed to the Federal Court of Appeal. And one of our main grounds of appeal was, well, the court got it wrong, saying we couldn't lead all this evidence. It's basically, it was excluded. And the Court of Appeal did something really strange. Is they said, you can't file that evidence, we don't want to see it. Now, I challenge anyone, you go and find another Court of Appeal decision where the issue is whether evidence should have been admitted or not, where the evidence isn't before the court to know what it is. And the court says, no, you cannot file it. We're not going to look at it. What we're going to do is this. We're going to break the appeal into two parts. The first part, you show up and you argue that the evidence should go in. And if we agree with you, then you can file it. And then some date down the road, we don't know what that'll be, you can argue whether or not people should have notice and a right to be heard. Was there a charter violation, and is that what we should find? So we show up for the first part, and the court said, well, we're actually not deciding that. And because we don't see any problem, there's no evidence, the sky's blue, we dismiss your appeal. I've never felt more railroaded in my life. And so what we did is we applied to the Supreme Court of Canada to ask them if they would hear an appeal. We don't have a right for that. And the difficulty the Supreme Court of Canada has is they just have so many people applying saying this is urgent that they only let a few in and they decided not to hear ours. So we're stuck, we're done, it's the dead end. But the result for you is that if Health Canada seizes a product that you actually rely on, you for sure do not have the right to be told it was seized. And you don't have the right to say you should get it back and have a balancing. Which is very important for you to know because we are in the process of losing products. So, I mean, most of you are here because you're aware we're losing products. We have, it's funny, like years ago when I first started lecturing, what was that? Causing some, thank you. You know, I predicted we were going to lose like 75 or 80% of our products. And why we're losing them is Health Canada, in theory to protect us, came out with some regulations that require products to get licenses. And it's just very strict. And right now, a little less than half, but close to half of the license applications fail. So you might think, well, okay, we're going to lose half of our products that we had access to before. Like the golden years were like 2004, 2005, 2006, and then we started going down. But at that point, there was an estimated 70,000, 80,000 products on the market. We're going to lose more than half because there are a lot of products where the manufacturers aren't even trying to go through the licensing process because they know they won't get through or they can't afford it. In fact, I know of at least one booth I checked upstairs, a whole line of products that they're not trying to get licensed. Once the enforcement, once Health Canada is aware, those things will disappear. And then we've lost probably now about 30,000 foreign products, primarily ones from the United States, where they just won't ship anymore. I mean, probably almost everyone in this room now when you visit the United States, if you're like me, you go to a health food store and you buy stuff we can't get here because they don't have the licensing requirement. So we're losing these products. And the question is well, why? Why are we losing these products? If you ask your MP or you ask Health Canada, you'll be told, well, we need this for our safety. Okay? So I hope you feel good. This is about your safety. And I actually get angry. It's funny, I was giving the lecture, it wasn't Aurora, but it was somewhere in the GTA last fall, and an MP was there, and he said, it's for your safety. And I got angry because it's just so backwards. You ask Health Canada for a single risk analysis You show me a single risk analysis, Health Canada, you've done to show that we need these strict regulations for our safety. They haven't done one. And then you ask, well, okay, but your regulations are taking products away. Have you done a risk analysis to show that there's any danger in removing a product? Because we're going to lose like 50 or 60,000 products that we were free to access before, that we were using before. And can we pretend there's not a health risk? I mean, I've told you about e-Empower Plus, where actually, I mean, I invited the court to find that people died when Health Canada took the product away. Do you know how many deaths we're aware of in Canadian history caused by taking a natural health product? Zero. Zero. I mean, that, just go back to 1867, you know, Confederation. Nobody can point to a single case of a natural health product actually causing death. Now, it doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but it does certainly mean it hasn't happened with frequency enough that we could actually know about it. But the point being, we're pretending that it's safe to take products away. I got a call, it was just last week, by a lady named Jerry Madden, and I asked her during the conversation, I said, Jerry, this is compelling. I'm giving a lecture in Toronto, can I share your story? She's giving permission. So just so you know, if you tell me your story, it's not like I go and share it publicly if I haven't asked for your permission, okay? Jerry was diagnosed with breast cancer 25 years ago, and she had, you know, the cancerous lump removed, and she had radiation treatment, and then 5 years later, the cancer came back. And there were 3 lumps. They had taken samples of each one. They all came back cancerous. It's like, okay, you need surgery, you need radiation. I don't remember now whether they also were going to do chemo. But there was a problem scheduling surgery time, and then that became complicated by her surgeon was going on a long vacation. And the long and the short of it was she was going to be waiting 3 or 4 months before her surgery, and she was just so panicked she wasn't willing to do nothing. So she ended up going to 2 different naturopathic doctors who were experts in cancer, and they got her on this regime of natural products. And so when her cancer came around, the tumors had all shrunk dramatically. They couldn't find any cancerous tissue in them. And she says her oncologist is still stumped, like it's like no explanation, because there were separate samples of the different 3. They were all cancerous, no ambiguity, and then none of them were. And so she decided after that, you know, I'm going to keep on a couple of these products. And there was one, you know, primary one that she's then been on ever since. She has, just so you know, she has gotten cancer. She had gotten cancer again and had a mastectomy of one breast. So it's not like it was a cure. But here's the interesting part, is she says, you know, when I first got cancer, breast cancer, I became very sensitive about breast cancer. So whenever anyone around me got it, I mean, I'm really paying attention. And it's so prevalent, like so many of my friends, so many people I know, so many acquaintances, so many family members have gotten breast cancer. And I've watched this for 25 years, and she says, nobody's done as well as me. She says, I keep going to funerals, because they just keep going through the mainstream treatments. And she was calling me because the product that she relies on, it's shipped from the States and they'll no longer ship. It's one of the 30,000 that we've lost. And she asked me why. Why when everyone I've watched around me, no one's done as well as me, why are they taking this product away? Why can Americans have it and I can't? Like what's, and you know, the answer is, well, Jerry, this is for your safety. And I feel, you know, quite a bit of negative emotion saying that, because isn't it awful? And the point I'm making is what we're doing in allowing all these products to be taken away, it's actually harmful. Yeah. There's a health consequence. It's funny, it was at this show last year, I don't know if any of you were here, and we had microphones and there's questions and answers, and there were some people from, you know, this skeptics group, and the one got up and said, well, you know, we have to prevent fraud, and these products don't work anyway, and blah, blah, blah. And then other people from the crowd started sharing their stories, you know, which is, we keep hearing it again and again. They had a serious condition, they tried the mainstream treatments, they didn't work, they found a natural treatment that worked, and they've never been better. I mean, this is real. I mean, it kind of touched me, because when that happened and they were trying to disrupt the lecture, you're thinking, oh crap, you know, people aren't going to be able to hear the message. And then it was, I walked away from that just going, oh wow, like it was just a magical experience, because we know, we live it, right? I mean, we can be disturbed, we can be disrupted, but we're not gonna, it's not like the rule's gonna be pulled over us. We know that what we're doing is very dangerous. And on the safety issue, I mean, one thing that's driving me mad right now, just to show Health Canada's bias, is the recall issue. Because people, they write to Health Canada and they call Health Canada and they complain, and sometimes they forward me Health Canada's responses. And a new one that's come up is, and this started last spring, is sometimes Health Canada will respond to people bragging about how many recalls of natural products they've ordered. And I think the last time somebody sent me something, it was 250 something. And Health Canada is bragging, saying, well, we've ordered all of these recalls, and sometimes it was because of adverse reactions. And some of those adverse reactions, and I love the language, were potentially dangerous. Not saying anyone got hurt here, but they were potentially dangerous. Bearing in mind that nobody's ever died, doesn't mean that people don't suffer adverse reactions. It does happen. I mean, there's so many products, so many conditions. I don't want to minimize that, but here's where the bias is. I mean, if you phone Health Canada and complain about, upset stomach on a natural health product, they're going to order it to be recalled. But let's just say Health Canada decided for a year to be completely honest and treat every product the same, regardless natural or chemical. And they said, if there's a single death, we're going to order a recall. That's the only reason we're going to order a recall, is if there's a single death. But, we're going to do this consistently. So after a year, we know there wouldn't be a single recall on a natural health product. Would there be a single chemical pharmaceutical left on the market? And even the over-the-counter ones. Actually, I thought about this, Vicks Vapor Rub. Now that started as a natural health product, so that might not count. But even your pain medications, cold, flu medications, things like that, they cause deaths every year. But doesn't that kind of tell us about safety?
Yes.
It tells us writ large about safety. So there's a bias against these products. We have regulations that are designed literally to remove them. Like when I first read these regulations in 2001, it was like, oh my gosh, we're losing the majority of products. It was clear. So we're losing our right to choose. And I want to read you a quote by Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, yes.
And I really want you to pay attention to this quote, because I think that he was 100% correct. And Thomas Jefferson tells us, if we allow governments to tell us what food to eat or medicine to take, we are subjecting ourselves to the worst form of tyranny. Let me just say that again. If we allow our government to tell us what food to eat or medicine to take, we are subjecting ourselves to the worst form of tyranny. Now, we are allowing the government to tell us what food to eat. We're allowing it. We are allowing the government to tell us what medicine to take. We are allowing it. Logically then, we are allowing the government to subject us to the very worst form of tyranny. Which then kind of begs the question, doesn't it? Why do we love slavery? You see, now we might be a little more willing to actually address that, because we're allowing it. We know about the Michael Smiths. We're not going on hunger strikes. We're not writing letters. We're not calling. We're not protesting. We're not deciding to do anything. Most of us. We know we're losing products. We see it every day. And we actually know that people are being hurt. But it's not us personally. It's not us personally. So we're not doing anything. But if it happens to one of us, it happens to all of us. We actually need to become absolutely active. We need to actually occupy our own bodies. Right? That's what we do. Because just like those Occupy Wall Street people who are just saying, by being there, I'm being counted, you cannot allow the government to tell you what to do with your own body. You need to occupy it again. That's why I'm trying to. So I appreciate that resonates, but we really do. So I'm going to kind of just switch, because I'd like you to support us in what we're doing. I don't know if you know who we are, but we're it's a long name, I didn't come up with it, sorry. Natural Health Product Protection Association. If you have a pen, I want to give you two websites that I really need you to have a good look at. And the first one is, I'll give you a second to get your paper set. Charter of Health Freedom. So it's just www.charterofhealthfreedom.org. But if you just Google Charter of Health Freedom, you'll find it. And I need to tell you about the Charter of Health Freedom. In 2008, a bunch of groups across Canada were concerned. We saw where this was going, and we held a couple of conferences and just asked the question, how do we solve this? We see that under the current regulations, we're going to lose our access. We don't like this. And we decided that actually the way to solve it was to come up with a law that would take the health rights that the courts say we should have and put it into a law. Actually, we had a little bit of foresight now. I see it includes a health freedom ombudsman, so if a product's being taken away that you depend on, you at least have a venue, somebody who can make it public and try to shame the government, which now that we know the courts say we don't have a right to be told and a right to be heard, that became more important. It takes the regulation, it's a separate act to regulate natural health products, and it takes the regulation away from Health Canada and creates a Ministry of Wellness. And I challenge each of you to read the document. It's a beautiful thing. Every time I read it, I just go, oh my gosh, if we could only have this. But we actually need the government to introduce it. It can't be an opposition bill because it's what's called the spending bill. So our plan is to create a Canada-wide movement. We have a petition on the website that you can download and print off. It's not an online thing. We need physical signatures because those are the only ones we can have tabled in Parliament. And it's funny, we actually have not run a single campaign to get signatures. And we have over 80,000 right now. Just because people find out about it, it resonates, and they start getting them. We are going to run some campaigns this spring to get signatures. We actually want to double and triple what we have. We're going to approach some MPs to introduce them and try and create some media attention. But we also then we need to start educating the government. But we need to create a political movement. I want you to educate yourself about the Charter because it's a very proactive thing that we can do. But I also want you to go to the other website, which is www.nhppa.org. I'll say that again. Just the letters nhppa.org. And it's a mouthful, but it's just the first letter of Natural Health Product Protection Association. There's a section on there where you can subscribe, which entails giving us your email and also giving us your postal code. Why we want your postal code is it allows us to slot you into one of the federal ridings based on where you live. I think we also ask you what riding you're in just to make it easier for us. But because during an election, if we can get the people in a riding, let's say there's going to be a close riding and we need you to be particularly active, it just allows us to do that. But if we have your email address, we can let you know what's going on, and there are times where we say, hey, we need some action. You know, most obvious example is when Bill C-6 was working its way through, we asked people, you write to the Senate and you get me to the Senate. And we got there, and the senators killed the bill. I mean, it works. So, but if we can't contact you, we can't ask you to be active, right? So we really do need, and we also need you to support us financially if you consider that. Just because we run on a shoestring budget, and even coming out here, flying and meals and stuff like that, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. And if you actually care about this, even $20 a month, like we don't want a one-off gift. $20 a month. That's what, going to Starbucks 3 times in a month? Like, become active, become responsible. And if it's not us, any other group, but become financially responsible because this doesn't happen in a vacuum. And we do need your help. We feel so frustrated. There's so many things we want to do. And we just feel, oh, well, we can't. We have to wait till we raise cash to do this initiative or that. And literally we want, we'd like to have a couple other people on staff to be running campaigns and stuff. Because we can win this if we will wake up. We can occupy our bodies again, but we need to become super active. So thank you very much. I will answer the odd question.